A midwife thrusts a swaddled infant onto a cold stone slab and declares, "Born dead," while the assembly holds its breath. Suspicion rises in the researcher. Why this family, why this child, and who benefits from declaring a person already absent of soul at birth? That suspicion hardens into alarm when the village elder steps forward and states that the child must be processed according to law and right. The immediate conflict is clear: an infant will be marked and managed as an absence, and the occult researcher will either record it as social fact or intervene. Within the first minutes, the community's problem stands plain: a practice that names people as non-persons and turns births into civic decisions. The occult researcher crouches beside the stone slab, hands gloved in dark linen, and examines the swaddling. He notes the soot smears, the tied cord, and a faint incision at the temple of the child that suggests midwifery ritual rather than simple accident. He speaks to the midwife without raising his voice. "Midwife, show me where you found this mark." The midwife, face flaring in the hearthlight, replies, "Here, where the cord lay. We mark those who do not answer the breath." Her line is short and declarative. In this exchange, the researcher's role is active. He inspects, asks, and writes. The evidence is physical and immediate. They move the infant to the corner where a single lantern hangs. The researcher opens his notebook and sketches the incision, while the village elder lists the duties attached to the designation. The born dead watch thresholds, carry ashes, guard the river, the elder says. The elder's voice is steady and procedural, as if reading a ledger. The researcher taps his pen and asks, "Who ensures consent?" The elder answers, "The law is older than consent." The conversation makes the conflict sharper: ritual duty versus family agency. A scribe steps forward and unfolds a brittle folio. The folio's corner crumbles under the scribe's thumb. The scribe, whose hands are stained with charcoal, sets the document on the table and points to marginal notes that list obligations and penalties. "This is municipal code with ritual gloss," the scribe says. The researcher reads aloud a line: "Soul, absence is legal status, maintained by elders." He places a gloved finger on a faded sigil in the margin. The presence of written rules shifts the scene from rumor to recorded social practice. At the communal hut's entrance, the midwife begins a soft, practiced litany as elders ready the shroud. The researcher watches the midwife tie a cord around the infant's wrist and feel the cord's rough fiber under his glove. He lifts the shroud and notes the coarse weave. The midwife does not meet his eyes. Later, alone with the midwife in the threshing room, she speaks in a tone that breaks her ritual calm. "I once resisted," she says, and the researcher feels a change. Alarm slides into resolve. The midwife describes how families were offered grain and a place by the river in exchange for agreeing to the designation. Her confession turns a ritual moment into an economic one. The researcher asks, "Tell me the first time you named a child born dead." The midwife shifts and answers in measured phrases. "It was winter. The flood had taken barns. We needed hands to tend the charred fields." Their kin consented under the stove's heat and the elder's promise of seed. She pauses and squeezes a cloth between her fingers. The researcher's pen moves continuously. He asks about punishment for refusal. She laughs without humor. "Refusal brings ruin. Refusal brings a child left at the ford. No one wants that." The midwife's words tie survival calculations to ritual classification. Outside, the villagers gather on the ritual platform. The researcher stands to the side beneath a low beam, ringed by carvings he will later sketch. The village elder speaks to the assembly in the old ledger's cadence: "We hold the balance. The born dead keep the hinges of safety." The midwife presents the child forward. Elders touch the shroud with deliberate, practiced motions. The researcher notes the rhythm, a public performance intended to fix belief and action together. He records the elders' precise gestures because gestures are evidence of authority. During the diagnostic rite at the river's edge, a tremor occurs. The born dead gives a tiny movement, a breathy sound that the elders had said could not happen. A ripple of confusion passes through the assembly. The village elder's jaw tightens. The researcher steps forward and says, "He breathed." The elder replies, "He only twitched." Small reflexes happen. The midwife moves to steady the child's head. The event forces the elders to reassert control by turning the movement into a manageable anomaly. The researcher's doubt intensifies. Suspicion bends toward the possibility that the designation has been overapplied. Back in the hut, the scribe produces another folio, and the researcher compares marginalia. The new note contains a list of pretexts for designation. Poor birth, deformity, multiple births, and births during famine. The researcher traces a line that connects ritual practice to social triage. He asks the scribe who drafts these notes. The scribe taps the page. We copy what the elders order. Names are added by consensus. The researcher hears the word consensus and recognizes its use as a tool to legitimize decisions that might otherwise be coerced. The midwife pulls the researcher aside before the morning assembly. Her voice drops into near whisper. He did not answer at first. I did not want the cord cut. Her hands shake when she adjusts the child's shroud. She tells a specific memory. The first time a mother stayed and watched her child labeled. The mother took the cord and threw it into the fire rather than hand it to the elder. The midwife uses that story to reveal pressure she felt. The researcher's suspicion shifts into anger at the mechanisms that corner families. At dawn beneath the carved totem, the researcher confronts the village elder in public. Elder, the researcher says, holding out the folio, this document treats people as tools. Who enforces this on your behalf? The elder answers, we enforce what keeps the village whole. The researcher presses, who decides which lives are tools? The elder's reply is a quick list of survival outcomes. Those who cannot answer the communal work are set to watch thresholds. They protect fields from nocturnal loss. A small argument follows. 3 quick exchanges where the researcher names consequences and the elder repeats the utilitarian rationale. The public challenge escalates stakes and forces the elder to justify practice before witnesses. After the assembly, a younger woman named Lyra by the midwife approaches. Lyra's hands hold a strip of woven reed. I saw my brother taken once, she says. They put cord on him and sent him to the river path with an ash tin. Lyra's voice is a sharpened fragment. She pleads without ceremony. The researcher asks, why did they choose him? Lyra answers, he had a cuff and no dowry. The village could not feed him, and that the river would keep him safe. Lyra's concrete recollection changes the researcher's understanding of selection criteria from abstract rule to economic triage backed by neighbor reports. The scribe offers a torn folio page with an inked diagram of ritual implements, cord, shroud, amulet, and an order of speech to declare absence. The researcher photographs the diagram by drawing rapid lines in his notebook. He asks, who owns these implements? The scribe looks past him. The elders maintain them. They lend them to midwives when needed. The researcher records who controls material power. The diagram shows a sequence that privileges elder authority at every step. This evidence alters the researcher's next move. He must follow the chain of custody to understand how decisions recur. At the riverbank, elders assemble a platform with a blood-washed cloth. The community splits before the ritual begins. Half of the people arrange stones and seats for the rite and half cluster with the midwife. The researcher watches the split and notes which household names gather where. The midwife steps forward and says, let us spare the child a public burning. The elder answers, that is not the law. The midwife's motion to save and the elder's refusal set up the chapter's climax, a decision that will bind the born, dead's fate. The climax begins when the elder orders a punitive rite to be performed and the midwife physically interposes herself. She addresses the assembly in short, direct lines. Stop. We will not burn this child. We will bind and watch him, not sacrifice him. The elder snaps back. You undermine our order, midwife. A rapid exchange follows. 3 to 5 short lines where names are invoked. Midwife, elder, researcher, and accusations fly. The born dead is held between 2 robed figures. The midwife grips the shroud and the elder grips a ritual blade. The community presses in, and the researcher records the faces and names of those who will bear responsibility if the rite proceeds. The midwife's faction argues for restraint, citing previous mistakes and the smuggling of children to the ford. The elder's faction insists on the law and the protection it provides. Conflict sharpens into a decision point when Lyra steps between the robed figures and demands, then let him serve the river watch. Let us test him under care, not cut him loose. The elder narrows his eyes but hesitates. The assembly mutters. Some clutch tools, others drop hands to mouths. The researcher feels alarm become resolve once more. He will document the choice and its terms. The assembly votes by a traditional method. Casting ash pebbles into a bowl, The bowl's sound is small and decisive. The vote splits closely. The elder forces the final call. He declares that the child will live, but under watch, wearing the tied cord and shroud, and sent to the river path as a threshold keeper. The crowd disperses with a mix of relief and quiet anger. The researcher notes the precise words of the elder's verdict for his record. The decision resolves the chapter's central dispute but leaves the social consequence intact. The child remains marked and subordinated. After the decision, the born, dead is led away under a watch that reads like custody. The midwife whispers instructions to the watchers and presses a small amulet into the child's wrapped hand. The researcher writes the amulet's description, river, pebbles set in twine, and the sentence that the midwife adds. If he strays, bring him back. The watchers take turns holding the child's weight and studying the cord. The scene is practical and tactile rather than symbolic. Each person performs a duty that confirms the child's status. That afternoon, the researcher returns to the makeshift study by the riverbank and compiles testimony. He interrogates the scribe again about the marginalia and asks for names of other communities. The scribe lists 2 settlements upriver with similar notations and adds, they mark by river season. The researcher records this new lead and photographs sigils with charcoal rubbings. The discovery suggests a wider pattern rather than a single local custom and gives the researcher an active trail to follow. The final scene in the chapter is a quiet, concrete portent. The researcher closes the brittle folio and slides a small pressed sigil into its pages. He writes a single note. Follow the river upriver to the second sigil. The born dead walks off beneath the willow, one watcher at his side, the midwife trailing behind with a small basket of food. The researcher pockets his sketch and rises, listening to the sound of sandals on wet stones. The closing action is specific and situational. A decision recorded, a path chosen, and a marked body led away under supervision. Throughout the chapter, emotion shifts guided the researcher's decisions. Suspicion opened his inquiry, alarm pushed him into confrontation, and resolve made him record and follow evidence. He never lingers in abstract introspection. He notes hands, chords, and ledger phrases. He records names midwife, village elder, scribe, lyra, and matches each to a concrete role in the decision. The chapter ends with a clear next task. Follow the sigil upriver and test whether this practice is local or systemic. The occult researcher closes his notebook, secures the folio, and walks toward the path the watchers take. The sound of the river at his right and the weight of newly recorded law in his satchel. The rope bit into the born, dead's wrist as 4 villagers hauled the body down the worn track to the river. Suspicion tightened the occult researcher's jaw. He stepped from the lane and called. Stop! The rope jerked. A woman fell back and clutched her stomach. The ford was half light, the water silvered by dusk, and the village elder barked, let it be. The rite proceeds. Within those first violent moments the problem was visible. Bodies were being moved like tools, and suspicion drove the researcher to stop watching and begin acting. He had left the scratch of candlelight and vellum for this. To test whether the midwife's naming, the phrase that had toppled a household in the last chapter, was a superstition or a system. He moved toward the ford with his coat flapping and the leather strap of his satchel damp against his hip. He had seen the midwife's hands earlier that evening, stained with charcoal and soot, but here the hands that bound were other hands, young, steady, and practiced. He had the same doubt he carried into every archive. Was someone profiting? That doubt sharpened into purpose as he crossed the shallow water, shoes slapping cold stones. Occult researcher, the midwife, called from the bank, naming him with the provincial iron in her voice. He answered with a question, not a statement. Why this child? Why this family? The mother, white-faced and breathing fast, clutched at the child's robe and said nothing. The born, dead, did not weep or reach. The subject stared past the river and shifted one slow shoulder. The crowd pressed forward. The village elder raised both hands. You too far, scholar. This is order, he said. This is protection. The researcher had read such lines in marginalia and ledger entries, but paper could be burned. Here an elder's hands and a tied cord were evidence in flesh. The first external event came half an hour earlier in his memory. The midwife thrust a swaddled infant onto a cold stone slab and declared that child born absent. He had recorded the phrase in his notebook, but he would not repeat it aloud here. He used the memory only to orient his next question. He the midwife who signs for this. She named a name and then fell silent when the acolyte behind her coughed. The acolyte's eyes cut away from the river and toward the ritual house, where a cloth had been stained and left to dry in a corner. The ford smelled of river mud and smoked fish. The born dead's breath made a soft, irregular sound like a distant bell. The researcher moved closer and crouched, letting the water lap his boots. He traced the cord binding the wrist. Coarse fiber, tied in a practiced knot. He noted the amulet of river, pebble-bound beneath the tunic. He touched the amulet lightly with a gloved finger. It was cool, slimed with algae. His hands recorded details and his voice asked for explanation. "Midwife," he said, "did you mark this child at birth?" She answered with a repetition of the official line, "Ancient reasons, holy precedent." But her words frayed when he pressed about property or debt. "We do what is needed." She said, "We do what protects people." The researcher heard evasions he had already seen in ledger columns. Land transfers under a different hand, cancelled obligations for patrons, side entries in a scribe's cramped script. A new event occurred. A younger villager stepped forward and spat. "You call this protection?" The villager shouted, naming the village elder with contempt. "You sell our grain and call it holy!" The elder's face pinched. He jabbed a finger back. "You speak out of turn, Thomas. Remember your place." Thomas answered with a swing of contempt. "My place. My sister lost a field. The exchange cut the air." The researcher watched the way Thomas's jaw worked and how the mother's hand tightened on the child's cloth. The group tightened. Suspicion shifted into anger in several throats. After the Ford confrontation, the researcher followed the midwife to her cottage at the lane's bend. He had to test words with documents. She set a pot on the embers and refused to meet his eyes. "You will make trouble," she said, fingers worrying at the hem of her apron. The researcher sat and opened a small leather folio. "Then tell me whose name appears on the register when you declare a child born dead." She named the village elder and 2 patrons from nearby holdings. The researcher watched the midwife's throat move. He watched the kettle steam. Her defense was not magic but habit. He left the cottage but not the question. Knees dirty, he went to the scribe's study, where lamp smoke had stained the beams and a clerk kept his satchel of quills like a talisman. The scribe flinched at the researcher's approach, but he did not hide the folded account he kept beneath his ledger. The researcher plainly, "Show me the marginalia that mentions payments for designations." The scribe pushed the folio across the table and pointed with a stained thumb. The pages revealed names and numbers, small parcels of land transferred, exemptions of labor, and notations that read like receipts. The writing left no room for supernatural explanations. It read as accounting. Who receives the favors? The researcher. The scribe named 2 patrons and then paused. The midwife gets a grain allowance, sometimes a share of a field. The elder signs for protection. The researcher tapped the ink where a fold concealed initials. He slid the folio open and found a folded account listing land concessions tied to each born dead declaration. He traced the ink with his finger and felt a shift. Doubt tightened to certainty. This was no isolated superstition. This was organized advantage. He left the scribe with the folio tucked into his coat and walked to the right's house behind the communal hall, where the acolyte kept practice. The acolyte, a slim man named Joran, had the posture of someone who learned gestures by watching rather than feeling. Joran took him to a low room lined with votive racks, watched Joran, and he bent the born dead into stillness, instructing the subject to enact the liminal gestures used at market and at threshold. The born dead lifted hands with slow puppet-like motion, setting down votive bundles and stepping without turning the head. Joran's hands were exact. "Hold that gaze," he coached. "Breathe shallow, do not seek." The born dead complied with the ritualized mechanics learned by rote. The researcher recorded every detail. The knot, the small amulet, the way the subject's eyes avoided contact. The demonstration changed the problem again. Agency was trained out. The born dead's body was disciplined into utility. Suspicion had turned into anger for some. For the researcher, anger folded into responsibility. The next discovery occurred in a secret alcove in the village archive. Joran, unexpectedly nervous now that the researcher had seen the training, slid a ledger from behind a stack of unused hymnals. "We keep names there when the elder asks," he said. The ledger listed patrons and cancelled debts, annotated with small crosses and dates. The researcher read the ledger aloud. March, field transfer to Lazen. June, exemption for Varka. October, protection granted to House Wren. He looked at Joran, who made these entries. Joran swallowed. The elder instructs. The scribe writes. The researcher felt a twist of surprise. The midwife's hand was not the only one signing away obligations. The ledger made the system communal and bureaucratic. He took the ledger to the council hall that night. The council room smelled of old sweat and stale beer. The elder sat beneath a faded banner, and the council members lined the benches like a small wall. The researcher laid the ledger flat and said, "These entries show exchanges for declarations. Who authorized these trades?" The elder's knuckles whitened around his staff. "You lie about our customs," he said. "You insult the gods." The researcher pushed harder. "You profit when fields change hands and debts vanish. This is trafficking." The council erupted into a short, rapid argument. "You accuse us of crimes," the elder spat. "You trade land and call it divine," the researcher answered. "You will leave," the elder. "No, the researcher, you will leave," the elder repeated louder. "Not until the ledger is explained," the researcher. 3 younger members of the council shifted in their seats. One, Thomas, who had shouted at the ford, said, "Tell us the truth, elder." The elder's mouth tightened. The rapid exchange ended with a threat that left the researcher aware he had become a liability. The next day, the ritual at the river returned the story to its peak. The villagers came at night, torches guttering. They bound the born, dead beneath a cloth stained with old blood and ash, and they carried a small wooden chest to the water's edge. The mother trembled and whispered a plea that the researcher could not hear. The acolyte began the threshold incantation in a voice neither loud nor soft. The words had the cadence of instruction, the same cadence he had traced in manuscripts. The researcher lunged forward to stop the act. Hans grabbed his coat and shoved him back. The elder barked, "This is our law." The acolyte tightened a knot and the mother stepped to the edge. The researcher tried to rip the cloth away. The acolyte shoved his elbow into the researcher's ribs. The scene pitched into physical conflict. The researcher fell and the cloth slipped. For a heartbeat the river reflected torchlight and the tied hands of the born, dead. The acolyte's voice rose. The mother screamed a single syllable and the rope around the born, dead's wrist strained. Someone shouted, "Stop!" A younger villager pushed forward and grabbed the acolyte by the shoulder. Several people broke ranks. In the scramble, the wooden chest toppled and spilled small written receipts, the paper fluttering like fish scales on the water. The crowd stilled at the sight of names. The field of advantage had been exposed in ink. The elder's face blanched. He ordered the chest covered again. The researcher rose with the ledger in his hand and read aloud one entry the crowd could not ignore. Wren, protected. Field reassigned March. Thomas snatched up a receipt and hurled it at the elder. "You called it holy!" he cried. This was the chapter's climax. A near sacrificial rite interrupted, the ledger revealed, the mother anguished, and the born, dead at the center, trembling but alive. The physicality of the confrontation forced the institution's secrecy into the open. The crowd shifted. Some backed the elder, some turned toward Thomas and the researcher. The acolyte's jaw worked. He had trained the born dead for years. The public collapse of that training left him exposed and ashamed. The aftermath arrived with dawn. Hands moved to staunch a bleeding lip. Mothers argued in low, sharp sentences. The born dead lay on a rough blanket near the ford, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. The mother cradled the subject and whispered one name over and over. The researcher recorded names and injuries, marking which villagers had taken receipts and which had denied involvement. The ledger, now smudged and water, dark at one corner, had reshaped alliances. Thomas, who had lost a field, met the researcher's eye without flinching. The acolyte stood a step apart, face ashen, while the elder retreated to speak to those still loyal. In the temporary study that evening, the researcher laid out the ledger, the midwife's suit, stained note, a damaged ceremonial cord, and a damp receipt on the table. He wrote with a steady hand and sealed the bundle with wax. He had to decide whether to publish the evidence, expose the ledger and the names, risk further violence for those who had already suffered, or to archive the truth and seek a slower legal remedy. He turned the pages again. The signatures were precise, a patron's mark repeated. The midwife's allowance line appeared several times. The pattern left no honest explanation beyond organized exchange. He catalogued witnesses. Midwife who had named the firstborn dead. Joran the ritual acolyte who trained the subject. The scribe who had placed entries hidden in margins. Thomas, the younger villager who publicly accused the elder. The village elder who ordered the rites. Each name attached to behavior that changed the village's balance of power. He wrote a short, precise account of what had happened at dusk and at night, listing receipts and times. He recorded the mother's whispered name and the way the born, dead had not reached for comfort. Before he sealed the satchel, a final twist arrived. As he prepared his public account, someone knocked at his door. He opened to find Joran the acolyte, face hollow and hands stained with ash. Joran handed him a folded scrap of parchment. They kept another ledger, Joran in a voice that trembled only once, hidden beneath a hymn book in the rites house. I could not sleep. I copied this down. The researcher took the scrap and read. New dates, new names, an entry that linked a patron in a neighboring village to the elder's ledger. The twist changed the scale of culpability. This was not merely local greed. It had reach. The researcher paused. He felt a concrete pressure at his throat and a cold in his palms as he sealed the satchel. He arranged the ledgers and the cord inside, tied the twine tight, and pressed wax into the seal. He did not write a long reflection. He wrote one precise sentence for a future account. Ledger evidence ties land concessions to born, dead declarations. Two patrons benefit repeatedly. Then he rose, slings the satchel over his shoulder, and left his temporary study by the back door. The chapter ended with his step onto the lane, the satchel thumping against his hip, and his decision to prepare a public account that would test the village's rule. Emotion root. Suspicion had driven him to the ford, and it remained the motive for every question he asked. Emotion shifts occurred repeatedly. Suspicion into anger at the ledger, anger into resolve to gather evidence, resolve into fear when the council threatened, and fear folding into a cool decision to expose the ledger. Each shift showed on his hands, a clenched fist, a quickened pen, a steadying breath, a tightened jaw. The born, dead remained a silent center, trained into service, and the villagers who had once called the practice protection now faced a ledger that named their bargains. The chapter closes on the researcher walking toward the town gate with the sealed satchel, the ledger pressed against his ribs, and Joran following at a cautious distance. A knock at the elder's door would be next, or a message delivered to a patron across the ridge. The choice was concrete. Deliver the evidence now and risk immediate collapse, or carry the proof to a neutral magistrate and risk the ledger being buried. He walked, and the river's faint sound accompanied his steps, each footfall a deliberate decision toward the next confrontation. I slammed the annotated folio on the oak with both hands and said, "Who has been named born dead?" Suspicion tightened the room. The occult researcher had chased that suspicion across fields and manuscripts. Now he demanded answers in a council chamber that had never been used for interrogation. The village elder sat stiff, fingers folded over a wooden badge carved with the river knot. The scribe's face flushed. Ink smears ran across his knuckles. The midwife stood behind him, one hand pressed to her apron, eyes fixed on the folio. Within a handful of sentences the problem was clear. A child had been declared without soul at birth, and that declaration carried legal force in village records. The researcher had found marginalia tying those declarations to land transfers and dowries. He pushed the folio toward the elder. "You named her dead, Master Elder," he said. "Why?" Elder's voice remained thin and controlled. "We followed the custom." The midwife called it, and I accepted her word, name, the researcher, and tapped a margin note with his gloved finger. The note listed a mark, the same sigil the scribe had been copying for years, and a ledger entry reducing a parcel to the river house. Suspicion was the first driving pulse. The researcher did not wait for explanations. He had spent nights mapping ink flows and tally marks. The room smelled of smoked oak and hot wax. He opened the folio to a page the scribe had never agreed to show outsiders. The ink was uneven. The sigil pressed harder on certain lines where the quill dug in. Scribe, the researcher, show the ledger. The scribe swallowed and reached for a small, bound book on the table's side shelf. He set it down like an accusation. The folio lay open between them. The chapter in front of the council tied ritual designations to family advantage. The researcher read aloud the marginalia, voice steady, entry year 3rd, dowry adjusted, river, house parcel transferred on verdict of born, dead. He looked at Elder. Who benefits? Elder's jaw tightened. The law is older than any of us here. The right preserves order. The law was written by hands with names in this ledger. The researcher replied. He tapped 2 entries where a family's name repeated, circled by the same sigil that marked births labeled absent of spirit. The midwife, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. Stop this, Elder. The child, she was cold. I said what I must. I swaddled her to warm her. I tried the willow poultice. Her voice had the brittle cadence of someone who had held infants through night and mornings. I said what I saw. River, woman, who had come down from the ford earlier, leaned her weight on the doorframe and spoke without moving her lips much. You it too. Elder. You signed the record. The ledger shows it. Her tone carried a hard certainty, not accusation but fact. An event shifted the room. A servant at the doorway dragged a shrouded bundle in and laid it on the flagstones. The midwife made a small, painful sound and covered her mouth with both hands. The shroud's weight made a dull sound as it hit the floor and unrolled to reveal a pale face with milky eyes. The born dead lay still as a carved figure, breaths shallow and irregular. The scribe stepped back. The village women who had crowded the chamber moved closer, in instinct, hands hovering, not touching. The midwife said, It's her. It's the child from Costa's hold. She named the place where the folio's entry had started. Tension shifted into immediate ritual attention. The villagers' movements changed. They formed a loose ring. Eldar cleared his throat and raised both hands. We must follow custom. We must not anger the warding. The researcher watched the born, dead. Suspicion shifted toward anger when he saw suit on the infant's swaddling and a faint charcoal smudge on the hem that matched the sigil in the folio. He traced the same motion he used over manuscripts, fingertips skimming a margin. The scribe's hands trembled. Scribe, the researcher, quieter, explained the mark and the ledger entries. The scribe shifted, then pulled the ledger closer and opened to a page where columns of names marched down in neat script. Beside some names were small notations and a sketched sigil pressed faintly into the vellum. He kept his head down. I wrote what I was told to write, he said. I copied, wrote. I did not make the marks. The researcher laid one photograph of an earlier birth, taken from an abandoned cottage. The image showing a midwife's hand pushing an infant onto a cold stone slab beside the ledger. The midwife declared it once, he said, and the ledger recorded the transfer. The next births followed the pattern. He let that fact sit. An outside event. A mule, team cart creaked past the mullioned window, a clatter that made a child in the doorway flinch. River, woman stepped forward and touched the born, dead's wrist as if to test for time of life. Her fingers found the tied cord. She pulled the cord and showed a simple amulet of river stone. This is not an outcast's trinket, she said. This is a token from the ford. Whoever placed her here wanted the warding to mark her. A doubting voice came from the corner. Are you saying the warding was bought? The midwife asked. She used the scribe's name. Scribe, did you copy that sigil as payment? The scribe's mouth opened and closed. He was the first to break in the circle of polite ritual. They me. When the wardings are kept, the river house keeps safe. They me names come and go, and the sigil keeps debts paid. I wrote what they'd paid me for land, grain, a dowry. I thought the ritual was truth. I thought it protected us, that confession changed the room's dynamic. Suspicion mutated into betrayal. The elder's face reddened. You lie, Elder snapped. You speak of payments to defame the right. We cannot let rumor undo centuries. The researcher did not let the accusation stand. Scribe, show the entries that lead to families gaining land after born, dead decrees. He demanded, bring the ledger forward. The scribe flipped pages with shaking fingers and exposed a ledger column where names handed off lots. Within the same season the declarations occurred. River, woman pointed to one name repeated. Costa, river house, then the name of a family that had been rising in wealth. Look, she said, Costa's parcel went to Marin's kin right after the verdict. Marin's kin painted the last door with gold leaf last spring. Scribe, who ordered that entry. The scribe dropped his head again. The hand that orders is the same that pays for the ink. I merely wrote what they gave me to write. Midnight had been the chamber's hour when the researcher had burst in. Now the sky near the high windows had softened toward pre-dawn. The chamber's brazier had guttered low and ashes flecked the floor. An external event. A distant bell tolled once, measured, and someone in the room counted the stroke aloud. The count made the gathering aware of time and consequences. The elder rose in a sudden movement and slammed his palm onto the table. "Enough," he said. "You seek to append order. You accuse families and are right older than your folio. Outlanders will see chaos and descend on us. We must not give them the sight." He used the researcher's title indirectly, a slur against outsiders who read manuscripts. "Eldar," the midwife said, voice low. "Order is not worth the child's life." A small rapid exchange followed. 3 quick lines that cut like knives. "Eldar," the researcher, "did you sign any verdicts?" "Yes, Eldar, when I consented I believed the villagers." "Whose voice paid for the consent?" The researcher. The scribe had been cradling a small folded paper beneath his palm. He pulled it free and unfolded it. Ink marks on the paper matched the sigil and a note. "Payment promised upon transfer." He slid the paper across the table. The elders leaned in, faces pinched. That small reveal forced a new event. The scribe, cornered by the researcher's mounting evidence, admitted a hidden margin note. He of a sigil that only appeared in some entries and of a token exchanged for the right to declare a child without soul. "They paid coin to name the child dead so the farm would transfer to them," he said. "I wrote it. I signed it." He looked at Elder, waiting for words that did not come. Anger grew to outrage. The midwife stepped forward and grabbed the shroud, trying to pull it away from the brazier. "No right will burn this child's shroud," she said. The river woman moved fast and blocked her. Hands braced. "Mira River woman," to the midwife, using her name. "We must not let violence decide." Their voices crossed and the chamber erupted into shouts. Dialogue burst in short, staccato waves. "Give it here," Eldar barked. "Let the right stand." "No," the midwife snapped. "Not here." She tried to wrench the shroud free again. "Hold." The researcher. He stepped between them and reached for the child's wrist. The born dead flinched, a small animal motion, and then reached very slowly for his hand. The fingers were skeletal and the gesture surprised everyone. The room moved into its climax, breathless, violent, accidental. The born dead's reach created a struggle. River woman lunged, Eldar shoved, the midwife twisted. The brazier tipped when someone grabbed clumsy at its stand. Hot coals spilled and a scattering of ember struck the hem of the shroud. Smoke coiled. A cry rose and a falling elder struck the stone step with a dull sound. At that instant the born dead made a second, clearer move. He reached for the researcher's hand again, fingers closing on the gloved palm. The researcher did not recoil. He held the hand and felt a faint, irregular pulse. In the chaos a shard of coal had set a ledger corner alight where the scribe had been standing nearby. The scribe swore and tried to press the flame into the brazier, tearing pages free, his hands blackened with soot. Violence gave rise to revelation. As the scribe beat at the burning page, several names and a list of recipients fell open and were exposed to everyone. The ledger admitted what the researcher had suspected. Entries tied verdicts to transfers and payments. River woman shouted the holding names aloud and forced Elder's hand by naming those who profited. "Marin's kin took the coast to plot the same week," she said. "Look at the ledger. There is the mark and the coin column." Elder tried to regain control with quick words. "This is slander," he said. "We must hold counsel. We must not let the brazier be a mob's judge." The midwife spat out, "Slander. Scribe, you wrote the slandering entries. Who ordered the ink?" The scribe turned his face and said, "They mean names and paid me. I wrote because I wanted the grain and my children's bread. I thought I served the village. I see now the ledger served a few." A quiet moment followed. The brazier's smoke rose and the shroud smoldered at one corner. The born dead's breathing grew shallow again. The researcher took off a corner of his robe and patted the child's cheek to cool the ember. He kept a hold on the child's hand. An external decision event occurred. The chamber considered custody. Arguments snapped back and forth. 3 to 6 rapid lines, each a bid to claim authority over the child and the narrative. Eldar, River, woman sharply. "You cannot burn what binds the law. You broke the law's trust when you signed away land for coin. You cannot keep the child here." Eldar shot back. "Marin's kin will scream injustice. The warding protects us." He looked toward the doorway, imagining outside eyes. "She will not be burned." The midwife. "She will not be used for ledger tricks." She looked at the researcher. You found this. What do you propose? The researcher spoke with the method of someone used to weighing manuscripts. We catalogue what is left. We copy the ledger and lock the original. We name witnesses, and we place the child under neutral custody while we trace who profited. Scribe, you will show the full few pages to our witnesses now. He turned to River. Woman, Mara, will you keep watch at the ford? River Woman swallowed and nodded once. I will keep watch. The scribe produced more pages and set them on the table. He pointed to names and numbers. He read a passage aloud that implicated Maren's kin and 2 other families who had gained during a season when several children had been declared born dead. Each time the ledger showed a match. Verdict, a token, a partial change. This exposure forced another action. Eldar, under pressure, agreed to a limited compromise. We will not burn the child today, he said. We will investigate. We will have witnesses. We will keep the rite in order as law demands. But we will not let outsiders break our customs. The midwife spat a bitter sound. Order kept while children are transferred, she asked. The researcher answered with one action. He closed the folio and placed a small note inside describing the ledger's changes. He then took the broken ledger pages and with gloved hands set them in a basin of water near the doorway to stop the burning. He laid a ledger fragment on the table and folded it into his robe pouch. A new event settled the room. Eldar signaled 2 elders to stand watch while the midwife and River Woman argued about custody. The midwife wanted the child under her direct care. River Woman wanted the child taken to the ford and hidden in plain sight. The scribe, who had finally faced his part, asked for forgiveness with a simple, visible act. He knelt and scraped his ink-stained hands with a rag. That act triggered a narrower revelation when the researcher held up a ledger fragment and read a single line. Witness signature. El payment, 5 measures, seed recipient. Maren's kin. He looked at Eldar and then at the assembly. That signature is your hand, Eldar. You signed to accept payment in return for a verdict. Eldar flinched. He tried to speak, but the midwife's voice cracked across the chamber. You named a child dead and took seed for it, she said. Her hands trembled. Her fingers brushed the shroud's hem. Mira, the researcher, calling her by name. What did you see the night you called the child dead? The midwife's answer was concrete and cruel in detail. The infant failed to draw a full breath at birth. I placed it on cold stone and waited. I rubbed the chest. I tried warming. I tried willow poultice and hot water. There was no sucking, no cry. The infant's mouth was slack. I said the words because the law said I must call to the elders. I never expected the ledger to come afterward. Her voice had a clipped, exhausted rhythm. She did not seek to hide her guilt. You did not write the ledger. The researcher, you named the physical state of the child. The ledger shows what happened after. The ledger shows a market for declaration. River Woman cut in, then fix it. We keep the child and track the transfers. We let the village decide based on truth, not coin. Elder closed his eyes and then opened them with a decision that shifted the chapter toward resolution. We will place the child in neutral custody while we examine deeds, and the scribe will produce witnesses. We will bind the ledger and require an oath for future markings. If any family profited from a false verdict, restitution will be required. He used formal language, but his hands trembled. The midwife, still gripping a corner of the shroud, asked, "And what of the warding?" "We will suspend the warding for births until proper witnesses confirm the judgment, Elder, partly to save face. No more single-voice verdicts." The scribe, hearing this, offered a new action. He would copy the ledger in full into a sealed folio for neutral inspection. He would show the pages to the River Woman and the researcher as witnesses. He set to work in the chamber, hands moving with a clumsy haste to copy the now waterlogged pages. His copying was not just pen and script. It was a visible act of taking responsibility. An external choice followed. Custody of the born dead. The midwife wanted to care for the child directly. River Woman proposed the river bank as a temporary shelter, a place away from the chamber and the families who might stake claim. The researcher suggested a neutral third option, that the child be taken to a cleared cottage outside the hall under the watch of both Mira and Mara, while the ledger inquiry proceeded. They argued briefly. "I will not let the child be used as paper." "Mira, I will keep watch at the ford and answer any who come," Mara replied. The researcher cut in. We will do both. The child will be tended by Mira and guarded by Mara until witness statements are collected. The scribe will read the ledger aloud tomorrow at dawn, in the presence of 4 named watchers. Eldar, forced to accept, nodded. He signed a short mark into the folio the researcher handed him, binding the decision with his carved wooden badge laid on the page. The scribe placed his copied pages into a separate folio and handed them to the researcher, who tucked them into his leather satchel. That final administrative action ended the immediate quarrel. The room's noise fell into quiet emotions. The born dead lay still. Mira wrapped the child's shroud with gentler hands, now that no brazier threatened. Mara went to the doorway and watched the road, eyes fixed on the ford. A minor, surprising twist followed. While copying, the scribe found an entry that not only recorded payments, but also a notation about a shorn lock of hair kept in a family chest as guarantee. He mentioned this aloud, and the researcher realized the ledger's scheme extended beyond parcels to ancestral claims documented in tokens. They kept proof inside family chests to secure future claims. The researcher that explains how the transfers endured past elders. The ledger had been a bureaucratic tool as much as a ritual script. The revelation changed the stakes because it showed premeditation. The scheme was not a string of mistakes but a recorded process. Eldar's defense weakened. The scribe's face crumpled. He set down his pen and reached for the researcher's hand. "Take me with you. I will show you every page. I will name them." The researcher accepted and instructed the scribe to stay and copy a final list of witnesses. He then closed the folio and placed a small wax seal from his pocket over the ledger's torn corner. He held her to arrange for the village council to adjudicate the ledger copies openly at dawn. The chamber emptied in a taut, controlled way. Villagers drifted toward the door, not celebrating but not defeated. The midwife and river woman exchanged a look that contained both relief and exhaustion. The scribe remained, shoulders bent over the remaining pages, shedding ink like a confession. Outside, the first light of morning touched the river and the ford. The researcher gathered a thin satchel, set the copied folio inside, and with the midwife carrying the born dead in her arms, they walked to the river's edge. River woman came to meet them there. The 3 moved across the stones in a deliberate, visible decision. No burning, no secret transfers, an inquiry to follow. The researcher set the ledger fragment on a flat stone and placed the child's shroud beside it. He closed the folio and made one final entry with his brass-tipped stylus. Document reviewed, neutral custody assigned. Inquiry open, he handed the folio to the midwife and then to river woman. He looked at the born dead and felt the small, irregular warmth in the child's hand. The final concrete beat arrived when the midwife wrapped the child more tightly and set the tied cord, now a visible token, around the child's wrist so everyone could see the token's stone. River woman stepped into the shallows and let water run over the child's toes. The researcher placed the sealed ledger in his satchel and walked back up the track toward the council hall to arrange witnesses. He left behind a village that would now have to answer formally for the ledger's entries and for the names that had been bought. The chapter ended with an action, not a reflection. The researcher closed the folio, placed the shattered ledger beside the river's stones, and led the born dead into the shallows under the pale morning light. The river took the child's tiny footprints and washed soot from the shroud. The ledger's charred edge bobbed and sank a little, leaving the assembly with an immediate, tangible task: catalog every transfer, swear witnesses, and restore law through exposure and restitution. The records were no longer secret. The accused could be named. The decision, custody and inquiry, was concrete and in motion.